So, last time we made a video about this guy, it was in the context of him getting scratched, and we asked the question as to whether or not this was a big deal. Well, it's been a few weeks since then, and developments on the Kent Johnson front with the Columbus Blue Jackets have not necessarily gotten any better. In fact, Elliotte Friedman's recent 32 Thoughts written article highlights that there may be an idea floating around that spells a little bit more doom and gloom than we would have expected. Let's talk today about Kent Johnson once again and how his season has gone thus far, a big event that has gone down in his story recently, and how this all comes into play with the idea of a trade request. So, Kent Johnson, as we are all familiar, is a former top pick. He was 5th overall taken in the 2021 NHL Entry Draft, touted as the most video game-like player to come out of these drafts in a long time. One of the most creative guys when it comes to being able to dangle the puck around, being able to create offense and scoring a boatload of points. Think of the profile of a Trevor Zegras, but amped up a little bit higher. He's got a monster or a rock star chugged in there, and he's even more determined to creating the niftiest, fanciest plays on the ice. Kent Johnson was drafted 5th overall because he was a stud for the Michigan Wolverines in the NCAA. He ended off his sophomore season with that team with 37 points in 32 games played, as well as being over a point per game for Team Canada at the World Juniors. Last year, Kent Johnson had 40 points in 79 NHL games as a rookie, which was absolutely tremendous production. There was so much to look forward to with the Michigan rapping, puck-dangling, goal-scoring, playmaking center winger, and there really was a lot of potential heading into this year. However, as we had noted in the prior video, Kent Johnson did indeed get scratched. Now, we asked the question as to whether or not this was a big deal, whether or not the alarms should be blaring. We concluded that probably the answer should be no, but we still had that conversation regardless. Y'all were getting involved in the comments. It was a pretty good time. However, it's been a few weeks since then, and Kent Johnson, in 7 NHL games in this season's worth of play, has 1 goal and 2 assists for 3 total points. He is on pace for 34 points, which would be a decline from his season last year. And as the 80 games played projection suggests, he actually has gotten scratched more than once. So, let's talk about a pretty interesting thing that happened over the past few days that was brought up in Elliotte Friedman's recent 32 Thoughts. Senators owner Andlauer pushes back after tough penalties. The link is going to be in the description if you want to go ahead and read this yourself. However, if you scroll down over to thought number 9 in the most recent piece, Friedman writes here about how Kent Johnson is now represented by CAA. Johnson was scratched twice in the first 7 games, and, like many young talented players, is still finding his way. It happens. There's no reason for the Blue Jackets or their fans to panic right now, but what did raise some eyebrows is the fact that CAA, Kent Johnson's new representation, has indeed represented a couple of players who have asked out of Ohio in the past: Pierre-Luc Dubois and Seth Jones. Kent Johnson needs to recognize there are things he must do to make it work. And here's the thing, Friedman is not anywhere highlighting a trade request being imminent here or whatever, but he is just acknowledging that there was an idea tossed around by a bunch of fans and by a bunch of people who are monitoring the Blue Jackets and their situation. Wait a minute, Kent Johnson, who has been under some turmoil the past few days because he's been getting scratched, is now represented by the same group of people who helped PLD and Seth Jones force their ways out of Columbus. Red flag or yellow flag? Who really knows? And if you're looking for my 2 cents about it, obviously it's not ideal to have a young guy who is only 21 years old getting scratched in the NHL, especially after having a great season last year, but as we did talk about in the previous video, Kent Johnson is a guy who didn't really get off to the right start this season, and his play on the ice definitely demonstrates that there still is a little bit of room to grow mentally and allow himself to transition back into the NHL schedule. The Blue Jackets are trying to be very careful that they don't have another Cole Sillinger situation like they had a few years ago, where Sillinger debuted as a super stud rookie. He was great, especially for a first-year player, but the next year he absolutely tanked. Why did that happen? Was there a level of comfortability there that Cole Sillinger exhibited in his second season? A sort of entitlement that said that, hey, I was pretty good in my first year, I just got to do the same thing in the second year and things will be okay, right? Sort of mentality there? Who really knows? But it's clear to see here that Columbus did not want anything similar to happen with Johnson. Thus, he is getting a little bit more time off, he's getting a few scratches here and there, and the time he is spending on the ice hasn't been rewarding as a result. But does this mean that with the new change in management, or not management, but representation, he is bound, destined to going down the same path that the Seth Joneses and the PLDs of the world went through a few years ago? You gotta remember this, but when Pierre-Luc Dubois was a Blue Jacket, there were so many rumors, an endless amount of conversations happening every day on trade shows, podcasts, radio, TV, all about PLD and where he's gonna get traded next. It was the worst kept secret in the NHL that he wanted out. It was very public at that point. Seth Jones, on the other hand, was in a position where, after getting acquired from the Nashville Predators, he was pretty good in Columbus, but once word came out that the guy wasn't interested in signing a long-term extension with the Blue Jackets, that's when we all kind of figured, okay, yeah, he's gonna get traded soon too. There's no future here for Seth Jones with CBJ. All they got to do is hope for the best. And hey, they got some pretty good players. Adam Boqvist coming back in that deal. The pick that became David Jiricek. Thank you very much. So there was value to get out of these situations here. With PLD, it was kind of tough because you knew he wanted out, but you got Patrick Laine as a result, so that's a pretty good consolation prize, if not even an upgrade over what PLD was with the Blue Jackets. But for Kent Johnson, it's way too early to go out there and tell if this type of outcome is anywhere on the horizon. The reason I say that is because Seth Jones played, what was that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 full seasons with the Blue Jackets before getting sent over to the Chicago Blackhawks. PLD was drafted by Columbus, so he had 4 seasons with them. Actually, no, technically 3 full seasons and then 1 5-game stint before completely crapping out and not doing all too well there. So if, at the very least, you're trying to use the sands and patterns of time to predict what happens with Kent Johnson, there still is, at the very least, 1 or 2 more years before Kent Johnson will ask for a trade. That is, if you're assuming that because of his representation, he's going to have to do that same thing. For now, though, things are okay. Just gotta wait it out. The same conclusions from the prior video we made about Johnson are still going to be applied here. The season is only 1 month in. We are 10% of the way there. If Kent Johnson gets scratched a little bit more, if he is not given all the ice time in the world, that is not a problem, because the Blue Jackets seem to have a good idea as to what they're planning to do here. Not give Kent Johnson that entitlement that maybe plagued Cole Sillinger in Sillinger's second year, and instead allow him to hold himself accountable more. Say to him that, hey, not everything's guaranteed, you gotta work for these minutes, you gotta work for that deployment, thus forcing Kent Johnson to work at it a little bit harder and become a better player overall. What are your thoughts on this entire idea? Do you think it's even worth it for Elliotte Friedman to bring up the idea that Kent Johnson is represented by the other agents that also facilitated PLD and Seth Jones' departures from this team? Is that a red flag? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as well. The article is going to be linked in the description if you want to go ahead and read it. Of course, 32 Thoughts is 32 thoughts, so everybody kind of recognizes that the formatting of this program is really just kind of bouncing all over the league. There are other things in there if you wanted to read about other NHL news, but the CBJ one is linked on thought number 9. But either way, thoughts in the comment section below about Kent Johnson and the scratches, the representation, the Blue Jackets' future with him in the lineup, and whether or not that is in jeopardy. I hope you enjoyed this video. 99, and bye.